Welcome to the Business of Life podcast. Don't let fear and disengagement dictate the way you run your business or your life. Revolutionize the way things are done. Innovate, affect change, find your purpose. Friends, welcome to the podcast. My name's Hanan Huston and I'll be your host. Today, I have the privilege of talking to one of the professors from Harvard School of Business and Leadership and Entrepreneurship. She has been rated one of the world's top 40 business professors under the age of 40 and is the author of the book Edge, How to Turn Your Adversity into Advantage. If you've ever really felt up against it, going for a promotion or trying to get funding for your business, then this is the book for you. And this is why I'm so excited about today's interviews, because I know there's going to be a lot of take-homes or things we can apply, not only into our business life, but also our personal life. So please welcome with me, Laura Huang. Laura, thanks for joining us.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on here. I absolutely love the kind of principle of the book and your research. It really seems to show that the obstacles and barriers and, those negative perceptions people have of us that usually we feel hold us back, you actually can flip them around and make those things work for you in a situation. And you talk a lot about in the book, obviously like hard work's really important, but sometimes you can feel that you put in all this work and yet you've got other peers doing the same, which are accelerating further than what you are. And that's obviously really frustrating, but you talk a lot about making your hard work even harder for you. Just love if you could give us a bit of a run over of how that looks practically.
Yeah, I think, all of us from a really young age, we were either taught or we've seen lots of examples where people gave us this advice to, just work hard. And hard work is absolutely critical, right? I would never say that it's not critical. But the thing with hard work is that we often have this view that if you put the hard work, that it'll speak for itself. Yeah. And it often leaves us frustrated because we see that either we're putting just as much work in as someone else, but the outcomes are going to other people or the success is going to other people. And it's often because success and outcomes, quite frankly, sometimes are determined by perceptions and stereotypes and signals and cues. And so what I talk a lot in my book about is how we can actually flip those stereotypes to work in our favor, how we can take the negative perceptions and attributions that others are making about us and flip those and turn them to give us an advantage or give us an edge. And I think it's particularly important because a lot of times we deep down inside, we know that there's this myth of meritocracy, that so much is determined by these perceptions. But in the solutions that we see out there to address this, a lot of them are around system level or structural solutions, things like, let's have more equitable hiring processes or use algorithms for hiring or have more mentors and people in executive level positions that are more representative. But, everyone sort of faces this internally where even though we know that there is this imperfect system, we don't have the tools to operate within these imperfect systems. And so that's what I try and provide is strategies and tactics and how-tos of how anyone, based on any way that you're being perceived, regardless of who you are, can be, shifting and turning those perceptions to who we authentically are, rather than just letting other people write that narrative about who we are.
Oh, I love that because it's such like, you see it with so many things like, big problems worldwide or anything like that, where you look at yourself and you're like, well, what can, I as an individual actually do that's going to change anything like that? And it can feel very overwhelming and setting you back. But you give a lot of hope with that message that, you actually can do something. Like there is something you can do as an individual, which will shift how things are done in that. And I think it's really great. Like you look at this type of advice can go for kind of anyone really, can use it anywhere. But you look at people and I love the examples when you were comparing biases, that not the typical bias that I would think of most people, that the unconscious one might be, like gender differences or race differences, things like that. But you've even pointed out in the research that it's not just when you're different, it's, even the same, like women have similar biases against other women when they're talking to them. So this advice is great for people, like entrepreneurs or other people who are, maybe meeting with a VC, talking about funding, they've got meetings, things like that. They can really start to actually prep and look to, what can I do in this? Like, what would your kind of advice to those type of people going, like, how would you go about prepping for something like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first piece of it is really what you're sort of mentioning, which is that we typically think that these perceptions are around the normal cast of characters, things around gender, race, ethnicity, class, religion, sexual orientation, all these sort of things. But the first thing to remember is that, there are these generalized stereotypes about someone based on gender, for example, but there's also really specific perceptions where you can take multiple women or two women and they're going to be perceived in very different ways based on the industry that they're operating in or the mix of people that they're interacting with or what have you. The other piece of it is that you can take someone who doesn't have any of the normal types of stereotypes that you would expect, but there's still perceptions. So, for example, Ronan Farrow is someone that I've talked to who he is the epitome of what you would consider white cis male privilege. But yet he told me that, whenever he walks into a room, there are still perceptions being made about him, about how good of a writer he is, or whether he deserves his Pulitzer Prize, or whether he's only gotten to where he is because of his mother being Mia Farrow. There's all of these perceptions that are made based on invisible as well as visible differences. And so what I talk about and what I see in a lot of my research is the different ways in which we can flip those stereotypes or flip those perceptions in our favor. The first step is even realizing that there are these stereotypes, and how do we hone our ability to see where it may differ based on different people, different industries, knowing that even though we have certain strengths or different ways that we provide value, that it's going to shift. Those perceptions of that value we provide is going to shift based on lots of different factors. So how do we really develop intuition around what those things are? Then the second step is, once we realize what those perceptions and attributions are, how do we now turn those in our favor? So I'll give a quick example to kind of show how this works. So in some of my research, I find that older employees or older candidates, for example, that they have a harder time getting hired, getting raises, getting promotions. And we often assume, our lay perceptions are that it's about things like how technologically proficient they are, how good they are technically. But in fact, in a lot of situations, it's not about the technical skills at all. That when they're trying to get hired for positions in an organization or a company, there's an underlying perception, and that there's one underlying perception and one only, and that's about curiosity. That people think that older employees or older candidates are less curious. So when you're able to sort of figure out that perception or the attribution that they're making about you is that you're less curious, you're able to address that. So what I've done is in some of my studies and in some of my research, I've had older candidates before they're interviewing for a job, for example. I'll say to them, the one perception they have about you is that you're less curious, that you're not as curious. And just in telling them that, I find that they'll go into these interviews and I'll hear them saying things like, I'm curious about your company's strategy and how it's evolved over time. Or tell me a little bit, because I'm curious about your vision and how your vision has really adapted with the current situation. And not only are these individuals now rated higher in terms of curiosity, they're actually rated higher in terms of things like technological proficiency and how technically skilled they are. And they're more likely now to get the job. Yeah. So what you do is you're able to, when you're able to hone in on what are those underlying perceptions, you're able to now turn those and flip them in your favor so that you're much more likely to now get that job, get that raise, get that promotion, get that funding for your venture, because you are now redirecting them and guiding them to who you authentically are, and able to change to your advantage those perceptions that others may have about you.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Like it really reminds me of what I talk to people about in like customer experience. You know, if you really want to improve your customer experience ratings, take what people are generally annoyed about in your industry or business and make that a real highlight point. And then all of a sudden they have this, you know, like you said, there's like like an expectation that this is going to be average. And then all of a sudden it becomes one of the best things and they're like blown away. So it's really cool. So that works with people as well. Like it's not just that you get up to the same bar almost, you get bumped up further, like doubles down the effect even that you've.
That's right. And what I call it is delight. What you're really trying to do is delight your counterpart, right? You know, so the title of my book is Edge, and it's about how to gain an edge, but Edge actually stands for the framework that I've developed over the course of my research, where the EDGE stands for the pieces of this framework, where the D stands for delight. So the E actually stands for enrich, how you enrich and provide value in any sort of situation, and honing your ability to know those different perceptions. The problem is that we don't always have the opportunity to do so. So the D stands for delight. When you're actually able to delight your counterpart, that's the equivalent of cracking open that door a little bit. So you have the opportunity to show them how you enrich and provide value. The G stands for guide, which is such a critical piece of how you show others how you enrich and delight, which is that you're guiding and redirecting the perceptions and the stereotypes that others have about you. And the final E stands for effort and hard work, which is what we already talked about, which is that it comes last here. We often think that effort and hard work come first, that if you put in that hard work, it'll speak for itself. But in fact, it comes last. It's critical, but it comes last because when you know how you enrich and delight and guide, that's when your effort and hard work harder for you.
Yeah. I'd love to, the kind of delight phase and the guide phase, practically, like how would that look, do you think, if say you're in an interview or you've got something where you know, like you like you said, the curiosity thing, you bring it up. Is that more what you're talking about? Like you kind of address to them what you think their perception would be or what the negative part is, and then you try and guide them to see how it actually is with you instead.
Yeah, so I talk lots about different ways that you can actually guide those perceptions that others have about you. One is based on your traits, right? Things like how curious are you? How committed are you? How trustworthy are you? All of those sorts of things. And what you're really doing is you're doing this in a very benign way. You're not saying like, I know it's because I'm a woman that you think this, or I know it's because I have this background, or that I'm older, or that what you're doing is you're really capturing those positive sentiments that they maybe think less of you on, that you're not as curious, but you are really redirecting them and guiding them to do so. And so when you do that, it's essentially, it works hand in hand with delight. And I talk lots about, it's a whole section of my book around how do you actually delight your counterpart? What does that mean? And how do you uniquely do so in a way that's authentic to you? Because a lot of times we try and impress people or manage impressions, and it's not something that's very authentic.
No.
When you make it authentically yours, that's when it's all the more powerful. It's really showing them a piece of you or a part of you, or having them just pause for a second and considering you in a different way, in a way that they didn't expect, or is slightly counterintuitive, or whatever it may be. And so it's this element where, you know, a lot of times people sort of say like, what are the 5 steps that it takes to gain an edge? And I wish that there was a recipe where I could say like, step 1, do this, step 2, do this. Instead, it's really this perspective, this framework around these components, the E, D, G, E, which allows them to really make it your own. Because the more authentic you make it, the more you understand how you as an individual are being seen by others, and how your unique skills and strengths and underestimated strengths and weaknesses and all of that goes together to redirect and guide them to who you authentically are, so that you do show them the value you provide.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an interesting topic. Like how'd you get onto researching this? Was this like birthed out of personal experience, or is it, guided by
Yeah, I
someone
mean, it
else?
was a little bit. So it's interesting because I first started. I've been studying inequality and perceptions and disadvantages and people who feel underestimated in the workplace and in their lives for a really long time, and and I had been presenting a lot of my research around these disparities in terms of who's underestimated and who gets the opportunities. And I kept getting asked the question, well, what can we do about this? Are there ways that we can level the playing field? Are there ways that we can turn things around for ourselves? And again, I found that so many of the solutions were at the organizational level or at the system level. Like
Mm.
organizations can try and make things more fair, and we can try and put in algorithms, and we can try and put in checklists, but there wasn't a lot for individuals
Yeah.
operating from the inside out to be able to do things for themselves with their own personal experiences. And so the last couple of years of my research has all been around, like, what are subtle things that as individuals we can do to really level the playing field and even create an advantage or create an edge for ourselves.
Yeah.
So that's where it really came from. But I think even way before that, I think my own personal experiences were what really led to me being interested in studying those who are underestimated, or the ways that perceptions and attributions work in the first place. Just things that I had experienced in my own life. Both my parents were immigrants from Taiwan. And so I had seen growing up that they were getting turned down for promotion after promotion after promotion. And in one of those promotions, I remember my father, who, the person who had gotten promoted over him, who was now his boss, that my father was actually doing that job. He was doing the job of his boss because everyone knew that that person wasn't actually qualified to be doing that. And I remember asking him, like, why do you think you didn't get that job? And he said, I don't know, it's probably because of the way I speak, or my accent, or, and so that was one of the very first things that I studied, was perceptions based on someone's accent, or the way they communicate, or their style, or their tone. And it makes a huge difference in terms of the disparities that we see. So I really wanted to provide a way for people to empower themselves. And I think it's also really important for organizations, because organizations are looking for ways to have happier, more productive, more empowered employees. And so we don't often think about the ways in which, if your employees are feeling like they're empowered, like they have a voice, that they feel like they're providing value, that they in fact will provide a value and come up with creative, innovative ways to do things. And I think it's not just in business, it's also in life. Like, we are interacting with lots of people all the time. And so the more that we can be having these deeper, richer interpersonal interactions with people, the better off we are. And that only happens when we are able to guide people to who we authentically are.
Yeah. Oh man, it's so interesting. Like, obviously a lot of that, especially your journey as well, I imagine takes a lot of kind of self-perception, like, a lot of looking at yourself and trying to see how this fits with you. If you don't mind sharing with us, what were the kind of perceptions that that you felt that would be put on you, that you would have to overcome when you're talking to people? What ones kind of popped out to you?
I mean, so many that I've experienced all through my life. I think, early on, it was perceptions around, I remember that I tell this story about how I wasn't, I had, like, in my childhood, we had to take these like standardized tests. And growing up, I took these tests, and at one point my teacher said to me, like, something very strange happened. Like, you scored really high on these tests, like high enough that our government mandates that you be put in our gifted and talented program. But we've never had this happen before in our school. It's always been teachers who have recommended students to be in this program, because no one's ever tested high enough on, language arts and reading and math to be put into this program. And she said, something must be wrong. So they made me, and I was too young to really understand what was happening, but then they made me take a bunch of other tests. And again, I scored high enough to like state mandated be put into this gifted and talented program. And then they called my parents in and they said, we don't know what's happening because there must be something wrong here. Like there's no way that she scored high enough on reading and language arts because she doesn't speak English, even though I did. And it's one of, and it's I actually speak both Mandarin and English fluently, and so they were like, something is wrong here. So they put me into only half of the gifted and program just for math. Yeah. And this was the very first time they had ever like split someone. So I was in the normal class and then I had to be pulled out. So I wasn't allowed to be in this program. I was only like, it was very disruptive. I had to be pulled out and put back in, and pulled out and put back in, and only for like certain parts of the program because they said I didn't speak English well enough to be in this program. So there was all these sort of perceptions about who I was based on my race and my ethnicity. And I remember this sort of like all through my life, there was these sort of these kind of perceptions. But more than that, it was also like perceptions around, being a female professor who's young, and I do research on like venture capitalists and entrepreneurship, which is a very male dominated field. So people coming in and sort of saying like, oh, are you here to sell us Girl Scout cookies? Or like, like little things like that all through my life. But just, I think perceptions around like who I am and where I've come from and where I want to be going in my life. And I think a lot of us face these perceptions around our trajectories and our narratives and our stories. And it comes in lots of different forms, but that was the form that it came in for me. Very, very, very often. And, even when I was an engineer by training, but I was one of only 4 women who was in my major. And, things around like, oh, like you've all like tried to put your finger in an electrical socket before, or tried to take apart a television, which I never had, like as I never had. And, or, things around growing up where I had all these student loans to pay off and I didn't have my own computer, and just lots of different perceptions that are always out there for different people in different ways.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of that as well, like, I guess taking the principles that you put forward and actually putting into actions because it's quite a vulnerable process, right? So it could be quite difficult for people to do and to want to put themselves in there. I can imagine, I mean, obviously I've never taught people, but I can imagine like, especially in your students, you'd see like, especially, teaching leadership and entrepreneurship. I mean, entrepreneurship's just a field that failure and embarrassment just come part and parcel with, right? And I imagine that you'd see like things like this just not being put into practice and people kind of holding back because of the fear of, being embarrassed and failing. For you, what kind of advice do you tend to give that when you see, people not living up to their potential or going into something?
Failure is such a huge piece of life, and failure is a huge. When I do, when I talk about success, I say one of the most inevitable and important pieces of success is having experienced failure. Like it's such a piece. I mean, I have experienced so much failure myself. I mean, I've been rejected from so many different programs, from jobs, from people, from, I think there's so much rejection and failure in life. But what happens a lot of times is that when we experience failure, it's not so much the failure, but it's the embarrassment. It's the pride and the embarrassment that comes along with failure that really holds people back. Because a lot of times when we get embarrassed, the natural reaction is to say like, oh, like never again. Never again will I put myself in a situation where I feel that again, because embarrassment is such a like strong feeling where we don't want to ever feel that again. But that actually limits us. And so I tell my students, when you're embarrassed, that is the time to double down. That is the time to put yourself in the exact type of experience again, where you will feel the exact type of feeling again, because there is so much data in that. You learn so much about yourself and the situation and what you're trying to accomplish when you experience that embarrassment. That is a gift to you because you realize things around your beliefs and what you care about and what you're striving for and why maybe you were embarrassed in that situation where other people weren't, or why you might be not embarrassed in other situations, but other people would be. It tells you things about your values and your aspirations. And that's really the gift that failure and embarrassment gives you. And that's what allows you to inevitably become better at whatever it is you're trying to be better at and succeed. So, the example that always comes immediately to my mind is that
Please do share.
Yeah, I mean, I've been embarrassed so many times in presenting and being at the presentation skills. And I grew up as someone who is painfully shy. I'm a huge introvert. And now I'm a professor who has to go in and speak with, hundreds of students at one time, new students, new topics, like getting asked questions that come out all over the place so I think the only way that I really became and was able to embrace that was like just telling myself, like, I'm going to put myself out there and 10 times where I'm going to be embarrassed, where I have to do public speaking or present in front of people, and like literally having 10 boxes where I check that off. Like, okay, today I was embarrassed. Like I made a huge mistake there or something. And like going through, and after those 10, you realize and you learn things that really do help you along. So.
Oh, so good. I love like we're thinking about that as a process and actually, having the tick box there to do. It really reminds me of I always forget her name. Is it Sarah Berkeley, the lady who founded Spanx?
Oh, Blakely, Sarah Blakely.
Blakely, that's it. And I just loved her story talking about like at the dinner table around with their dad every night. He'd always ask them like how they failed, and it was never a negative thing. It was always like, if you're going to change and do things that are innovative, or you're going to fail. So like it's a point of pride, like try and do something where you'll fail, because then you're actually pushing the boundaries.
Yeah.
But like you said, I think you kind of demystify a lot of that fear and shame that comes with embarrassment when you actively pursue it. The anxiety dies down because your brain eventually is like, oh, well, you're actually wanting this to happen. Like, it's not that bad, you feel pain temporarily, but it goes. Oh, that's so good. I love that. That's words of wisdom for anyone. Do you reckon you have like a kind of advice that you would give young entrepreneurs or people kind of at the start of their ventures? Like if you had a key take home for them, what do you reckon it would be?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the main things that I tell a lot of entrepreneurs is to keep the main thing the main thing. And what I mean by that is like, know what's at the core, what's at the essence of what it is you're trying to do. It's so easy in our lives to get taken by tangential things or things on the outskirts. Like we get pulled in lots of different directions, and some of those you can explore, but always keep that main thing, the main thing that you're working on. And that really keeps you grounded and reminds you to focus on the ways that you do enrich and provide value, and that's what ultimately gives you an edge.
Yeah, that's great. I always think like having that vision personally obviously is great because it helps align everything you do towards whatever the main thing is that you're trying to achieve. And also I guess in business as well, it's the same principle. If your business has one thing that it does that you want it to mainly achieve, everything can be targeted towards that. Great advice indeed. Everyone listening, definitely implement it. One question before we go, this is I like to add this in. My wife generally pitches out a question she would like to hear answered. And one of the things we often talk about is, the research shows we greatly overestimate what we can achieve in 1 year and greatly underestimate what we can achieve in 10 years. For you, like 10 years ago, what did you kind of envision for your life? Do you think you are where you are, or is it different from what you thought it might look like? If you look 10 years back?
I mean, Yeah, for sure. I think 10 years ago, let's see, 10 years ago, I was in grad school and, and I had just recently started a PhD program, my PhD program. And, it was a scary thing. Like I still had one foot in the corporate world and one foot still in the academic world because I wasn't sure where the academic journey was going to take me and whether I was going to be a successful researcher, professor, any of those sort of things. And I think a lot of the times we do that. We like sort of hedge our bets and have one foot in one area and one foot in another. And it was around this time 10 years ago where I made the decision. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to be successful in either one if I don't try and just make the decision, and really just sort of leapt into like, I have to give it a shot. I have to give myself a shot and see where this goes. And there's lots of scary moments and lots of ups and downs in all of this. And it hasn't been a smooth ride. I mean, it hasn't been pretty at all, but I think that's what life is. It's like lots of stops and starts and ebbs and flows and zigs and zags. And we all create a narrative out of that. Yeah. But there's many different ways that those stories can be told. So I think it's an important point to kind of think about, the 1 year, the 5 year, the 10 year, and what that looks like.
Yeah, I always love it's a saying that I heard someone say. It really cracked me up. Like, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans.
Yeah, exactly. I
always find that good. So do you reckon 10 years ago and now that you've overshot where you thought you might be? Like,
yeah, I never dreamed. I mean, this is someone who I've gotten rejected from Harvard 3 times. Like once as a doctoral student, once as an MBA student, a doctoral student, and when I was applying for jobs, my initial job, and it was only a couple of years ago that they called me out of the blue and said, "Would you be willing to join our faculty?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding? You realize you've rejected me 3 times? What makes you think that I would be qualified to teach your MBAs when I wasn't even accepted into your MBA program?" So for sure, this is definitely something. I never thought I would write a book. I never thought that I would actually become a professor. And who knows? I mean, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So 10 years from now, I don't know if I'll be a professor or I'll be something else. So
yeah, that's great. You got such a good resilient mindset because a lot of people, I think, they'll think 3 strikes and out, right? That's probably the limit for a lot of people. We get rejected that many times, give up. No, maybe I'm not in the right path. But
no, remember I told you 10. I'm looking for 10 rejections.
Exactly. You've got to keep going. And Laura, before we go, can you tell everyone where they can find you, contact you?
Yeah. So my you can find me easily. My website is my first name, last name, laurahuang.net. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook. My handle is Laura Huang LA. So Laura, my last name is Huang LA. So all of the normal sort of places. And I have a blog and a newsletter. And so you can get monthly tidbits and strategies and tips on how you can gain your own edge. And it's a pleasure. So hopefully we'll be hearing from lots of you.
Oh, yeah. And everyone, get the book, Edge, Turning Adversity into Advantage. And is that, last time I checked, it wasn't on Audible yet. Is that coming out on Audible soon?
It is on Audible.
It is on Audible.
Well, it is on Audible, except you have to listen to my voice. It is my voice. Perfect. So that's the downfall of getting the Audible version, is that you have to listen to my voice for 4 hours or 5 hours or however long the Audible recording is.
It is awful listening to yourself in those headphones, isn't it?
I know. When I hear myself, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel bad for the listeners.
I was recording something in my friend's studio the other day, and I had them on, and I was like, is it possible that you can just turn me right down so I can't hear myself because it sounds awful? That's
right. Whereas we read the physical version, you actually get, you also get all of the footnotes. Like I have a lot of footnotes in there where my sort of sarcastic, cheeky commentary on stuff that's in the book, that some of it's not in the Audible version.
Yeah, I love that. I remember one of my friends, he's a sound engineer, and he said he was doing like someone's recording for Audible, and he said there was this guy who'd written a few books, and it was a self-development type thing, and he's like, it started off almost like really ethereal, it was like this random scene. He said the guy got about 3 lines into it and just goes, what the fuck have I written here? He goes, I'm not publishing this book. He's like, I'm going to rewrite. He's like, he left
I
it as ended
kept that clip. I would love, I have to kept those outtakes. So.
Oh, I'd love that. I was like, that is the funniest story I've heard in a long time.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, Laura, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.
Everyone go and follow her and get the book, and we'll be hearing from you soon, no doubt.
Okay, thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks for watching. If you want to join the revolution, follow and subscribe here. And if you want to revolutionize the way your business and your life is run, then contact us to find out more about our consulting and coaching packages. You can contact us via email, admin@hustonconsultants.co.uk.